portents. What are portents today? What is a portent? Something that presages future situations or events, also a marvel. The Hebrew word mopheth generally carries the idea of a miracle, as in the miracles performed through Moses and Aaron in Egypt. However, in some cases, the term is definitely used in the sense of a portent, as with regard to the prophet or dreamer who offers a sign or portent to be fulfilled in the future. To lend support to his prophecy, Daniel 13, 1-3. The portent, mopheth, might be a miraculous act manifesting divine power, as when the altar of Jeroboam was ripped apart by God, portending the still future and greater execution of his adverse judgment regarding that altar and those serving at it. 1 Kings 13, 1-5. You can compare the fulfillment some 300 years later at 2 Kings 23, 16-20. Or it might be just an unusual action performed by someone, as when Isaiah went naked and barefoot to portend the circumstances due to come on Egypt and Ethiopia at the hands of the king of Assyria, Isaiah 23-6. Or when Ezekiel made a hole in the wall, likely the wall of his residence, and took out his luggage through it as a portent of the exile facing Judah. Ezekiel 12, 5-11. You can compare Ezekiel 24, 18-27. Since a portent is a sign pointing to future things or circumstances, one writer may employ the word mopheth, portent or miracle, while another uses oath, O-H-T-H, sign. That's what it means, to describe the same thing. Compare 2 Chronicles 32:24 with 2 Kings 20:8-9. A sign may serve as a guide or indicator for the present, as well as for the future, whereas a portent relates primarily to the future. The designating of something as a sign stresses that it has significance, whether for the present or the future. Its being called a portent stresses its significance as relating to the future. Thus, when referring to Joel 2:30, which foretold portents, plural, the Hebrew mopheth, in the heavens and on the earth, the Apostle Peter spoke of portents, plural, of the tiras, in heaven above, and signs, plural, simeon, on earth, simeon, Acts 2:14-19. In the Christian Greek scriptures, the tiras is constantly used in combination with simeon, or simeon, the sign. Both terms being used in the plural form, Acts 7:36, 14:3, 15:12, 2 Corinthians 12:12. Basically, tiras refers to any act or thing exciting wonderment. Hence, it is properly translated wonders in some cases. Matthew 24:24, John 4:48. Where the future is more clearly involved, portent is more appropriate. Serving as credentials that Jesus was God's sent one were the powerful works and portents and signs that God did through him, Acts 2:22. The miraculous cures and resurrections he performed not only excited wonderment, but also portended what he would do on a greater scale in the future. John 6:54, John 1:50 and 51, and John 5:20 and 28. Some acts were portents of his future activity as God's high priest, forgiving sins, for example, and acting as a judge, Matthew 9:2 and 8, John 5:1-24. Others served as evidence of his future authority and power to act against Satan and his demons, abysing them, Matthew 12:22-29, Luke 8:27-33, Revelation 21-3. All such acts pointed forward to his messianic rule as anointed king of God's kingdom. Similarly, Jesus' disciples, as witnesses of his teaching and his resurrection, were backed up by God with signs as well as portents and various powerful works. Hebrews 2:3 and 4, Acts 2:43, Acts 5:12. These give evidence of God's dealings with the newly formed Christian congregation and portended his future use of that congregation to carry out his will and purpose. John 14:12. All false prophets, as false prophets arose in Israel, so the foretold apostasy in the Christian congregation would produce a man of lawlessness, whose presence would be evidenced by the operation of Satan with very powerful work in lying signs and portents. 2 Thessalonians 2:3-12. Thus, the evidence marshaled to support the apostate movement would not be weak or puny, but would manifest Satan's might. Some of you show that might of Satan when you comment against Jehovah's Witnesses and against Jehovah and against Jesus Christ and the angels. The portents would be the lying ones. However, either fraudulent on their face or deceptive as to the conclusions to which they lead, appearing to manifest God's benevolence and blessings, they would in reality divert persons from the source and path. Compare 2 Corinthians 11:3, 12:15. Beware of the devil's snares. Come out from the snare of the devil, 2 Timothy 2:26. Now, how can you avoid the feeling of excessive guilt? And what snares of the devil will we consider? Well, the devil stalks Jehovah's servants. His goal is not necessarily to destroy them. If he destroys or murders or kills us, what happens? Well, he can no longer take us away from Jehovah. We're going to be resurrected, and he loses. So he doesn't want us dead. As a big game hunter kills prey, rather the devil's main goal is to capture his quarry alive and use the... Only you can answer that. To catch prey alive, a trapper may use a snare of some sort. He may try to get the animal to come out into the open where he can capture it with a noose. Or he may use a hidden trap that has a trigger and takes the animal by surprise. If we want to avoid being caught, we must be alert and heed warning signs indicating that one of Satan's snares or traps is nearby. This article will consider how we can guard against 3 of the traps that Satan uses. So we're going to check those 3 out. Uncontrolled speech, fear and pressure, and excessive guilt. Quench the fire of uncontrolled speech. Failure to control our tongue could result in what? To flush animals out of hiding, a hunter may set a section of vegetation ablaze, catching the animals as they try to escape. In a figurative sense, the devil would like to set the Christian congregation ablaze. If he succeeds, he can drive its members away from that safe haven right into his clutches. How might we unwittingly collaborate with him and thus be entrapped by him? The disciple James likened the tongue to a fire. Let's check that out. James, I'm going to go with chapter 3, and verse 6 through 8. Verses 6 through 8. That's James 3 and 6 through 8. Now again, I'm going to use the New World Translation of the Holy Scriptures, but you can use any Bible you want. You can get a free copy right there. And it reads, "The tongue is also a fire. The tongue represents a world of unrighteousness among our body members, for it defies all the body and sets the whole course of life on fire. And it is set on fire by Gehenna. For every kind of wild animal and bird and reptile and sea creature is to be tamed and has been tamed by humans. But no human can tame the tongue. It is unruly and injurious, full of deadly poison." If we fail to control our tongue, we could start a figurative wildfire in the congregation. Now, how might this happen? Well, consider the following scenario. At a congregation meeting, an announcement is made that a certain sister has been appointed a regular pioneer. After the meeting, 2 publishers discuss this announcement. One expresses joy and has good wishes for the new pioneer. The other questions the pioneer's motives and implies that she's merely seeking prominence in the congregation. Which of those 2 publishers would you like to have as a friend? It is not hard to see which one is more likely to set the congregation ablaze through her speech. To quench the fire of uncontrolled speech, what self-examination would we all want to conduct? How can we quench the fire of uncontrolled speech? Jesus said, out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. Matthew 12:34. So the first step is to examine our own heart. Do we shun the bad feelings that fuel destructive speech? For example, when we hear that a brother is reaching out for some privilege or service, do we readily believe that his motives are pure, or do we suspect that he is driven by self-interest? If we have a tendency to be cynical, it is good to remember that the devil questioned the motives of God's faithful servant Job, Job 1:9-11. Rather than being suspicious of our brother, we would do well to consider why we are critical of him. Do we really have a good reason for being that way? Or has our heart been poisoned by the unloving spirit so prevalent during these last days? 2 Timothy 3:1-4. What are some reasons why we might be critical? And how should we respond if we are reviled? Consider some other reasons. One could be that we desire to make our own accomplishments more noticeable. In effect, we may be attempting to look taller by pushing others down. Or we may be trying to excuse our own failure to take positive action. Whether pride, envy, or insecurity is driving us, the result is destructive. It could even be that we feel justified in speaking critically of someone. Perhaps we have been a victim of his or her uncontrolled speech. Now, please don't try to apply this to apostates, disfellowship, disassociated, and inactive. This is what all of you should have done when you were inside the congregation. But you all tried to fire the congregation with that tongue of yours, and you got booted out. If that is the case, retaliating in any kind is not the answer, and that's what you tried to do. Doing so only adds fuel to the fire and works in harmony with the devil's will, not with God's. 2 Timothy 2:26. We do well to imitate Jesus in this regard. When he was being reviled, he did not go reviling in return. Instead, he kept on committing himself to the one who judges righteously, JEHOVAH. 1 Peter 2:21-23. Jesus was confident that Jehovah would take care of matters in his own way and in his own time. We should have the same trust in God. When we use our speech to heal, we help others persevere, and we preserve the uniting bond of peace in our congregations. Ephesians 4:1-3. Let's check that out. Ephesians 4:1-3. It's Ephesians 4, chapter 4. We consider 1-3. Therefore, I, the prisoner in the Lord, appeal to you to walk worthily, or the calling with which you were called, with all humility and mildness, with patience, putting up with one another in love, earnestly endeavoring to maintain the oneness of the Spirit in the uniting bond of peace. This is not talking about my treatment of you, apostates, the disassociated. That's not what we're discussing here. I'm discussing how you would act if you were inside the congregation. Now, why did Pilate condemn Jesus? An animal caught in a snare loses control over its freedom of movement. Similarly, a person who succumbs to fear and related pressure has given up at least some control of his life. Proverbs 29:25. Let us consider the examples of two very different men who yielded pressure and to fear, and see what we can learn from their experiences. The Roman governor Pontius Pilate he absolutely knew that Jesus Christ was an innocent man and apparently did not want to harm him. In fact, Pilate said that Jesus had done nothing deserving of death. Nevertheless, Pilate condemned him to death. Why? Because Pilate succumbed to the pressure from the mob. Luke 23:15 and verses 21-25. If you release this man, you are not a friend of Caesar, cried the opposers, those applying pressure in order to get their way. John 19:12. Pilate may have feared that he would lose his position, or possibly his life if he sided with Christ. So he allowed himself to be led into doing the devil's will. Now, what induced Peter to deny Christ? The Apostle Peter was one of Jesus' closest associates. He publicly declared that Jesus was the Messiah, Matthew 16:16. Peter remained loyal when other disciples did not grasp the meaning of what Jesus said and abandoned him, John 6:66-69. And when enemies came to arrest Jesus, Peter used a sword to defend his master, in John 18:10-11. Of course, later, Peter succumbed to fear and denied even knowing Jesus Christ. In fact, on the last time, he actually swore at Jesus. For a brief time, the apostle was caught in the snare of fear of man and allowed it to restrain him from taking a courageous course. We may have to contend with what negative influences. Well, as Christians, we need to resist pressure to do things that would displease God. Employers or others may try to coerce us into being dishonest, or may seek to induce us to engage in sexual immorality. Students may have to deal with peers who try to pressure them to cheat on exams, to view pornography, to smoke cigarettes, to use drugs, to use alcohol, or to engage in sexual misconduct. So what can help us to escape the snare of the fear and pressure to do what displeases Jehovah? What lessons can we learn from Pilate and Peter? Let us see what we can learn from the examples of Pilate and Peter. Pilate had little knowledge about Christ. Still, he knew that Jesus was innocent and was no ordinary man, but Pilate lacked humility and love for the true God. The devil easily caught him alive. Peter had both accurate knowledge and love for God. At times, though, he lacked modesty, became fearful, and succumbed to pressure. Prior to Jesus' arrest, Peter boasted, "Even if all the others are stumbled, yet I will not be." Mark 14:29. The apostle would have been better prepared for the test ahead had he taken the same position as that of the psalmist, who put his confidence in God and saying, "Jehovah is on my side, I shall not fear. What can earthly man do to me?" Psalm 118:6. On the final night of his earthly life, Jesus took Peter and two other apostles with him deep into the Garden of Gethsemane. Instead of remaining alert, however, Peter and his companions fell asleep. Jesus awakened them and said, "Men, keep on the watch and praying in order that you do not come into temptation." Mark 14:38. But Peter fell asleep again and later gave in to fear and pressure. Now, how can we resist pressure to do something wrong? The examples of Pilate and Peter can teach us another vital lesson. Success in resisting pressure involves a combination of such elements as accurate knowledge, humility, modesty, love for God, and fear of Jehovah, not humans. If our faith is built on accurate knowledge, we will courageously speak about our beliefs with conviction. This will help us to resist pressure and conquer fear of man. Of course, we must never overestimate our strength, and think that we, like for instance, have more than demons. We have more power than demons. We need to pray for Jehovah's Spirit and must let love for him motivate us to uphold his name and standards. See, only Jehovah can help us through that. Only his power can get us to resist pressure. Moreover, we need to prepare for pressure before we face a test. For instance, advanced preparation along with prayer can help our children to respond effectively when their peers try to induce them to do something wrong. 2 Corinthians 13:7. Avoid that trap that crushes excessive guilt now. Okay? I know that a lot of you apostates, you disfellowshipped and you disassociated, had that guilt trip. You're on that guilt trip. Get over that. Concerning our past mistakes, what would the devil like to conclude? Like us to conclude? Sometimes an animal trap consists of a very heavy log or a stone suspended over a path where prey often move about. An unwary animal hits the tripwire, causing the log or stone to fall, crushing the victim. Inordinate feelings of guilt may be likened to that heavy load that crushes. When thinking about a past mistake, we may feel crushed to an extreme degree. Satan would like to have us conclude that we are beyond the reach of Jehovah's mercy and are incapable of meeting his requirements. How can we avoid the trap of succumbing to excessive guilt? If you have become involved in serious sin, act now to restore your friendship with Jehovah. If you were disfellowshipped, if you're disassociated, if you are inactive because of something you've done in your past, go to your elders and let them pray over you and anoint you with the holy prayer of oil, the oil, which is holy prayers, and Bible. They'll take you through the Bible. So contact those elders and ask for their help. James 5:14-16. Do what you can to right the wrong. 2 Corinthians 7:11. If you receive the discipline, do not become downhearted. Discipline is a sure sign that Jehovah loves you. Hebrews 12:6. Be determined not to repeat the steps that led to this sin and act on that resolve. After you have repented and turned around, have faith that the ransom sacrifice of Jesus Christ really can cover your errors. 1 John 4:9-14. But you have to go through the disfellowshipping. You have to take time to reassociate when you disassociate. And if you're inactive, you can't expect everybody in the congregation to be your best friend when you were inactive for so many years. It's going to take time to win the dear ones over. They're going to accept you. They have to accept you. It's going to take time. Some individuals continue to harbor guilt over sins for which they have actually been forgiven. If that is true of you, remember that Jehovah forgave Peter and the other apostles for abandoning his beloved Son in Jesus' greatest hour of need. Imagine that. They all abandoned him when he needed them the most. You know, the third time that Peter rejected knowing the Christ looked down on him and saw him from up. He looked down on him, and Peter looked up at Christ. I don't know that. We don't even know what he said, but he swore. The Bible clearly says that he swore. So Jehovah forgave the man who was expelled from the congregation in Corinth for flagrant immorality, but who later repented. First Corinthians 5:1-5. And 2 Corinthians 2:6-8. God's word speaks of gross sinners who repented and were forgiven by God. Look at David. He killed a man for his wife. Paul used to murder Christians. Either conspiracy or actual throwing of stones. 2 Chronicles 3:33-2, 10 and 13, 1 Corinthians 6:9-11. Now, what can that ransom do for us? That ransom of Jesus Christ, what can that do for us? Jehovah will forgive and forget your past errors. He chooses to forget. He doesn't just accidentally forget things like we humans do. No, you see, he chooses not to recall it to his mind. If you are truly repentant and accept his mercy, you disfellowshipped ones, you need to get this through your thick, stupid heads. And I call you stupid because you are. You left the truth. You should have went just through the disciplinary procedures. Never feel that Jesus' ransom sacrifice cannot cover those sins, but you have to go through the discipline procedures. To do so would be to fall victim to one of Satan's snares. And you did. Most of you apostates, most of you disfellowship, most of you disassociated ones, you fell for that snare of Satan. You weren't even baptized yet and you fell for Satan's snares. You were one of them seeds that was planted and grew a little bit, but it was planted alongside the road, and Satan came along and snatched you away. The devil wants you to believe the ransom can cover the sins of all who have fallen into sin and have repented. Cannot do that. That's what he means. He means he wants you to believe that nothing can help you. Proverbs 24:16. Faith in the ransom can lift the burden of excessive guilt from your shoulders and can give you the strength to serve God with your whole heart, mind, and soul. Matthew 22:37. You need to return to Jehovah. There. Now, we're not ignorant of Satan's designs, are we? How can we avoid the devil's snares? Satan does not care which trap he ensnares us in. He has a whole shed full of them. You see, Satan's tactics never change, just his tools. As long as we are caught by him. See, he doesn't care. Since we are not ignorant of Satan's designs, we can avoid being overreached by the devil. 2 Corinthians 2:10-11. We will not be caught in his snares or traps. If we pray for wisdom to deal with our trials, If any one of you is lacking in wisdom, wrote James, let him keep seeking and asking God. For God gives generously to all and without reproaching, and it will be given him. James 1:5. We need to act in harmony, though, with our prayers by engaging in regular personal study and by applying God's Word and by meeting attendance. Even if you're disfellowshipped, you need to get back to the meetings. The Bible study aids provided by the faithful and discreet slave shed light on the traps set by the devil and help us to avoid them. Now, why should we hate what is bad? Well, prayer and the Bible study promote in us love and meeting attendance what is good. The Bible, meeting, personal study, all promote what is bad we should hate and what is good we should love. But it is equally important that we develop that hatred for bad. Psalm 97:10. Meditating on the consequences of pursuing selfish desires can help us to avoid them. When we learn to hate what is bad and truly love what is good, the bait that Satan uses in his traps repels us. It holds no allure to us. How thankful we are that God helps us so that we are not overreached by Satan. By means of Jehovah's Spirit, Word, and organization, Bibles, publications, right here. All these things are tools for us. Jehovah delivers us from that wicked one, Matthew 6:13. So please, return to Jehovah. You'll never regret it. You'll never regret it. And live forever in paradise earth. What do you got now? Nothing compared to what you could have. Thanks for watching this video. Have a great